Okay. So I got to start with this. A lawyer and engineer walk into a bar. All right. Okay. Then you know what? When I said that, I said, you know what? Let's stop. Let's make this a little more serious. So, but anyways, let's see what Mike's going to say about this.
If you Google this, it's actually a good joke. I end up on the end as usual, but occupational health and safety sometimes can be a little bit too serious. So what we're going to try to do is, while we give you an update, we also want you to look at the technology that might help you implement. And so as we go through some of the changes the Ontario government has made and will make, if we think of the Power Act that's currently in the House, I think last night sometime this week they referred it to a standing committee. And within that Power Act, there are some health and safety amendments that you're going to want to be aware of as well. So that's yet to be told. Can I see a show of hands for a minute? How many people remember a steel case called Quinlan, I think it was? I'm probably getting the name a bit wrong. Remember a steel case where unfortunately somebody passed away when they were working on a platform that was less than 3 meters off the ground? Anybody remember that? Okay. Perfect. Then that's where I'm going to start for a moment. We're going to go back and forth between occupational health and safety changes and how technology will help you in terms of compliance, so training, compliance, auditing, finding gaps, retraining again. But if you look at that case for a moment, and I'd ask you to think about that case a little bit, you know that the Occupational Health and Safety Act has a whole bunch of regs. And if you're in the industrial environment versus the mining environment versus the construction environment, you're looking at different pieces of legislation, hopefully applicable to a context. A whole bunch of regs as well. Quinlan actually turns this thing on its head from our perspective as lawyers. We spend a whole bunch of time, and I need to get it off that slide. Thanks. I'm feeling bad enough. Kidding. So if you think of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, all of you will remember 25(2)H. It says something like, you must take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances. Familiar sound to everybody in the room? We used to say, and for my first 20 years of my practice, I'd look at a reg that said if somebody was working above 3 meters, depending upon my context, I might have to have guardrails. I might have to have fall arrest or the training on the fall arrest. As we move through some of this presentation, I may now have to be a little bit more careful than I've been with respect to PPE that actually fits people, which sounds crazy that we had to legislate that. But if you go back to the general duty, as I call it, the duty to take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances, I want to just walk you through this case. We have somebody working in an industrial establishment. So right now, for most of us, we know we're going over to the section on industrial establishments, 851, I think, something like that. We know that for the most part, if somebody is working above 3 meters, I am looking for guardrails. I am looking for fall arrest or something to keep them safe. If I was in the construction industry and I had somebody working on the 3rd floor of a residential home and they're wearing fall arrest, are they tied off to the right anchor point? Simple things we all think of. And I used to think, as a defense lawyer, that's where I place myself. I'm lucky. My colleagues and I, we get to do a whole bunch of training. And that training is trying to make sure we put your organization and your people in a position to be able to have a due diligence defense from a lawyer's perspective. I might start with what I know you all agree with. I want everybody to go home the same way they got here. Right? And how many of you have young individuals coming out of high school or college programs that are about to land on your jobs? We're in the middle of May. So you've got an opportunity, and I'm sure you're all into it already in terms of how you're going to orient those folks to ensure they stay safe when they work for their first summer maybe, or second summer in an environment you need them to go home safe every night. So back to the case. Industrial establishment, the person who's working, that's the subject matter of the case, unfortunate by the way, is a welder. And he's welding a large vessel, and to weld that large vessel, he needs to be 6 foot 6 inches in the air. And so they set up a platform. The platform is about just less than 2 feet wide, and it's on an A-frame. So it's sturdy. It's not shaking or anything like that. The person's able to walk and work on that. Unfortunately, what happens when you weld? What do you wear over your face? Right? The welding helmet comes down. You know, you do have that visibility piece, but frankly, when you weld, sometimes that thing turns colors and also makes it more difficult to see. So 6'6", what's that say as it relates to 3 meters, if anybody wants to do that math for me for a moment? Yeah, I'm still under it. So I don't need a guardrail according to the reg. I don't need fall arrest according to the regs. But unfortunately, when that mask comes down, that individual walks, and it's a long weld. It's an 8-foot weld against the machine that he's welding on the vessel. So if you think of it, on one side, he's safe because he's working on the vessel. But behind him and off both ends of that platform, he's not safe. And so what happens, unfortunately, is as he walks to the end, he misses where the end is, falls, and unfortunately, it's a fatality. That case goes to 2 levels of court for a moment. The first 2 levels say the employer complied with the reg, wasn't above 3 meters. And I'm simplifying a bit, right? Like when you read the case, you'll see more facts, but essential facts to make the point. The reg says above 3 meters, clearly the circumstance, the facts that are agreed to by the Crown in the case say below 3 meters. 2 levels of court dismiss the charges as against the employer. We get to Court of Appeal. Ontario Court of Appeal should be a cakewalk. No, that Court of Appeal says both levels of court got this all wrong. This is a statute that must be interpreted liberally. We all know that, right? We're trying to take care of people. But now what they do for the rest of us in this room, they put in question, because what they say is, in those circumstances, it was foreseeable. So now I'm into tort law, of all places to go for a moment. It was foreseeable that even below that reg, you could have and now should have done something to better protect that individual. And so for me, I say it puts everything in a disarray, because I, like on a Bible for the first 20 years, I'd look at a reg, I'd look for due diligence facts, and I'd say, okay, Crown, I got you. I'm going to get these charges dismissed. Or it wasn't foreseeable that this would happen. I'm going to get these charges dismissed. Quinlan really changes that for us. It's an older case, right? It happened in 18 and 19. But it's now going to put at risk your workplaces and the work we all do if somebody gets hurt, or, God forbid, somebody actually perishes. The last place any of us in this room want to be. So as we walk through this, I'm going to try to touch on some of the changes. But I hope what you find as I touch on them, and Sabesh and I go back and forth, what you find are these changes aren't monumental. These changes, most of you are probably already complying, would be my bet. But let's walk through them nevertheless. And what we really want to try to provide by way of a message is, depending upon the scope of what you're trying to cover, have you got 2 employees or do you have 2,000? Are you a consultant and you've got 25 companies? Because what's the other thing that is almost like the holy grail in this topic? Anybody want to, like, you've heard that general duty piece. What's the holy grail that every lawyer worth their salt or any professional in this room who helps companies is going to say? Anybody? Try. Anybody? Take a shot. Past practice? Okay. What do I have to do? Diligence and past practice. But what do I have to do if somebody says, show me? Thank you. All right? Come on up, trade places. No, but really, document. I can't imagine the amount of times where somebody has credibly said to me, we did the following, but has no paper. Paper, right? Through technology, right? Saves us in the old, how many people still remember writing training records as people came through a door and we had them sign in, as opposed to anything, right? Document management of some sort. So let's take a quick look. We're going to touch on remote workplaces. How many of you are involved in still hybrid situations where you've got workers who are actually either working from home 2 days a week, 3 days a week in the office? Anybody still working virtually? Anybody still on, how many people still use Zoom and Teams? Dumb question for the afternoon. Just making sure they're all awake still. Right? So do you believe you can be harassed on Teams? Is it possible this guy could harass you through the screen? Everybody's nodding. I don't look that mean. But so just moving ahead here a little bit. We're going to go one more, and we'll talk now. This overview we've really covered already, right? And we're not going to spend a lot of time. This was meant to be the overview. I want you to think of the overview, frankly, from the Quinlan Steel perspective, right? The regs are almost like table stakes, but they won't make the due diligence defense anymore. You've got to go further. So that means in a workplace, he and I might brainstorm. Should I walk off the stage? Can I hop off the stage? Right? In the reasonable context, I'm 3 feet off the ground. I can probably hop, or I might break an ankle. So I should walk off the stage. That's not, like, does this fit? Do I need a guardrail? I'm making it a little bit facetious, right? But it's actually taking your expertise in the regs, but then looking critically at the context. And when you look critically at the context, there are some extra things we probably need to do. And your experience helps with that.
So, thank you so much. So the most important thing about 4S is that, and the reason we built our services, we built our services in what we call the 3 pillars, right? Which is the consulting, training, and the software systems. Okay, so we didn't come to people and say, look, you need to train your employees, you need to do this, you need to do that. We just said, no, you have to do it in a structured format, right? Consulting to understand what your risks are and how you're going to be mitigating them, right? Training on whatever has driven the consulting. The consulting finds the gaps, it finds the areas where you guys need to work on, and then finally, all the records that you produce by conducting your safety activities have to be has to be captured somewhere, and that's what this whole training is going to be, right? And what we're going to discuss from the engineering side is a structured way of doing that, and then we're going to try to see if we can apply that to the Quinlan case.
Risk analysis depends on context. Everybody agrees on that. So if I'm Cirque du Soleil, just to take us out of our seats for a moment, I'm Cirque du Soleil, and I have troops traveling all over the world. They're going to say 6 to 8 weeks wherever they stay. Up goes the tent. They perform. We've all been lucky enough to see that probably at some point in time. Do they need a travel policy for their troops? Sure, right? Easy. They need a travel policy. What's got to be in that travel policy? It has to have a contextual analysis of the risks against which I throw them into. So if they're going to travel to France, and they're in France, and I'm prepared to give them a place to stay for my 6 to 8 weeks, or I'm prepared to give them a per diem so their family can travel with them, does it matter? I have a choice as an employer. Doesn't really matter as long as I now start to think of the context. I use Cirque du Soleil because they said at one point, we're in France, but we're outside the city centers, and 3 or 4 of my people said they wanted to bring their families and they wanted to be in a campground. Save some cash, they've got 4 kids. Anything wrong with that? Do I, the employer, have any responsibility for my employee who's staying in a campground as opposed to a hotel? Most of you are nodding. Absolutely. Just a quick example, right? We can take it right back to construction and talk about third story, sheathing, and so forth. But again, what I mean by that is the risk analysis piece that this film started with is our first easy basic step. Risk analysis. What risks are possibly there? It would have taken a bit of time for Quinlan to pick up on, because remember, the welding story I told you had been going on for 17 years in that company. Some of them knew there were some problems without having end butts, as they called them, little things that the boot would hit as you walked nearer the end. So there were different ways to comply. But risk analysis takes not just being able to read, it takes 2 or 3 of us brainstorming when we look at the context. And then we need that written down, right? It needs to be written down. The next piece I always think of is the standard of care. How far do I need to go? And if you're hearing tort, reasonably foreseeable, standard of care, duty of care, it really is in my brain in behind occupational health and safety from a topic perspective to try to think through this. Once I've got my risk analysis and I've identified it all, now I need to do training as one example, controls as an example, but let's just talk training to stay there to make it simple. How many of you have provided training to a group of employees? Hands up. Right, so we got 2/3 of the room at least. How many of you have provided the training and walked out of the room and said, they didn't understand a word I just said? Okay, a couple hands go up. So if I'm thinking context and I've identified it in my brain, I got to do something about it. And I'm running into it in the GTA all the time. We have such a melting pot. We have so many languages. I have to find a way. So what could you do simply from a training perspective, right? I can translate. For sure, I can get a bunch of, I know this organization, as an example, has provided training in, I think it's 11 languages. Can I also add to my training potentially 5 questions at the end that somehow test comprehension? All of this, please make the assumption I'm talking about doing something that I can record it having been done and I can warehouse it because I'm going to need it. But the language piece for the GTA, probably all over the place, but I think here at home is a challenge for all of us. I don't think we can ignore it. I don't think we've done our job, frankly, if we've done the training and you had just a hint, like some of you acknowledged when we left. I don't think they got it. Now, I may need a translator beside me. I may need somebody from their... Somebody asked me this in the last session I did like this. Would it be okay if they had a colleague sitting beside them translating? From my perspective, anything I can get my hands on to make sure he or I understand the trainer. Right? So the languages and AI and all these things that are coming to us from a technology perspective will help us solve some of these things if we embrace them. Recently, and I say recently to probably show that I'm a bit of a Luddite, I'm in a meeting and somebody is speaking and I'm used to having those, what do you call those, earphones on, real-time translation. And somebody said, no, we don't use those anymore. Just open the app on your phone. It'll real-time translate right in front of you in writing. Some people said that's been going on for 5 years, Sherrard, so I just caught on. The other thing that we have to do is think about, as somebody goes to a new site or you put in a new machine in an industrial complex, or you're using new technology, 3D programming or printing on a construction site. Training for me is at least annual most of the time, at least. Before I train that second cadre of people who went through my first training, have I audited the workplace to see what gaps there are now? Because there will be gaps. I want to audit, identify gaps, and tailor my training to address the gaps as well. Gaps are probably the most important one. My very first horrible situation when somebody 10 stories up, they were flying forms in and they were on the 10th floor and somebody was employed and they were oiling the boards and the rebar in the boards. But when they were flying the forms in, somebody moved the guardrails and the guardrails weren't put back in place, and somebody who had been on that site and in the country for less than a week walked backwards off the 10th floor. Pretty foreseeable, right? Pretty foreseeable. Today, and we're not going to talk a lot about penalties, but I'm just going to comment briefly on them. You know, today, occupational health and safety has changed, and the fines are significantly increasing. And remember, I say this just to be careful, increasing per count. Right? Remember, if you get orders and or charges from a Ministry of Labor inspector or through the Crown ultimately, you know you're going to see most times more than one count. So when you see $2 million caps, or for the first time in my career, $500,000 minimums if you've got a record, and it's more complex than that, but I've never seen minimums in my time. So while the ministry and a lot of the work that the Ministry of Labor, Immigration Training, Skills and Development is doing has AMPs as the start, administrative monetary penalties that are relatively low, these numbers are going up for a reason, right? When we look at historically, and somebody disagree if you've got these stats, but my understanding is we are still not improving upon the frequency of critical injuries and or fatalities. Now, some people may say we're improving on criticals because it looks like a straight line because we've changed the definition and we've broadened what is captured. But we haven't made a dent in fatalities. And so that's why I think Quinlan is so valuable to us. If we can embrace Quinlan and actually brainstorm with each other as we hit a site. Now, it's not just that easy, right? I've got to convince an employer to spend time and money. But I haven't met many employers who are willing to risk getting that phone call Friday night to say, the crane collapsed and so-and-so perished. We'll do just about anything to avoid that. So let's go into a couple of the quick changes. Telework, just to be very clear, we know telework is covered. Probably a logical assumption, I think, for most of us. But legislatively, it's changed near the end of 24. And you'll see Ministry of Labor inspectors starting to look for, point one, do you have a policy as it relates to home, working from home? Easy things. Does that person who works from home have a person to call in the event of an emergency? Does the supervisor of that group that works hybrid 2 days at home a week check in on them? Have we actually looked ergonomic chairs? Like little things, but still critical to be able to show that you've made good attempts at due diligence with respect to what risks those people face at home. We put the next one up because I think it's clear, but I sort of made a bit of fun of it, maybe unfortunately, in terms of, can I be harassed on a Teams call? Right? I absolutely, I've seen people harassed on a Teams call, and we know for leaders, you're supposed to stick yourself into that conversation and eliminate it or stop it immediately if possible. But if anybody was wondering, we wanted to make sure you had seen that virtual is clearly covered, right? There is no question at all about that. And you see really best practice is, I think, quite logical. Update your policies. When you do your next round of training, train on the updated policy. I don't think in some of these that I have to update my policy and immediately train. I'd like you to do that. But if you have an annual training, for example, as people come in to start work for you as we increase our headcount in the summer, great opportunity for everybody to get that same training that's updated to ensure that you're compliant. Do you want to touch that next one?
Sure. So we start with how we handle this from a technology point of view. Again, this is an interesting thing. We start with a little consulting because not everyone is going to be sitting around understanding what is happening, right? So what we do is we figure out, okay, these policies have to change because the legislation has changed, right? Then when a policy changes, then you update the training, and then you have to make sure that these refreshers are happening in a consistent manner. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to show you how some of this is happening in a more structured way, okay? And then I'll show you how, in the future, you want to have information coming from an expert like Michael right to you, okay?
Just touching on these ones, they're relatively straightforward, right? And this is a debate sometimes. Just a note of caution. Anybody here from the ministry before I take a shot at them? Okay, cool. There's a pro and a con here. I think the government's actually done a very good job at providing you with materials when they ask you to up your game, in my words, for a moment. So think of the materials they developed for us when we needed to make sure people were, my words, familiar with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. They said, we'll do the materials. All you've got to do is get people through them, right? Good help. I love their guides, right? Saves a whole bunch of time. Somebody wants to jump on their website, read their guide. But what I worry about is between the guide and due diligence compliance, I always worry that there's a little bit of a gap. Remember Quinlan, the regulation said 3 meters. The Court of Appeal said, general duty, every precaution reasonable in the circumstances. So I mean this seriously. I commend their materials to you. They do a good job at it. but then get an expert that's sitting here in the audience to help you with the context within which you're trying to keep people safe, let alone defend yourself from a due diligence perspective. Now, the nice part is, with the technology, this is going to be relatively easy. This won't be hard to, accessible in electronic format. It might be hard for me, the Luddite. Shouldn't be hard for anybody in this audience, right? And with 4S technology, should be a piece of cake. It's amazing how many workplaces, though, that I drop into in the old days didn't even have the posters up, right? And those were almost like the price of admission. Did you have the posters up by the time clock or the water fountain? Really easy stuff. Something to think about now, though, when they're saying readily accessible format, that's really easy legislative compliance in the most part. And remember, some of this we're going to want to translate, all right? And I can get official translations done in just about any language I want these days, subject to what my workforce looks like. I'm not trying to convey a message that you must do that, but it's a consideration depending upon the makeup of your workforce and their ability to consume the material you're trying to get them to consume to stay safe.
Thank you, Michael. So electronic postings. So this is an interesting thing. How many of you people have had Ministry of Labor inspectors come to you and say, that book is not green enough and the format is not right and, you can't have official labels? Yes, Raghavan, yes, right? We had a lot of people come in and say, well, it has to be printed from the Queen's printer and all that kind of stuff. So when electronic posters came out, to me it was a hallelujah moment. I mean, we are finally in the digital age that started in the 90s, and it finally took someone like the Honorable Minister Piccini to make this happen. Now, I can tell you what ForSafeCom does. We have banners, we have reference documents, so each user can go in and see all the documents, and we can go into all that, and it's $335, but I got something even better. And I actually showed this to the minister, and he was very, very impressed. So what we did was we actually put these documents into our AI bot. And the AI bot, you could ask questions to the AI bot. And this is a localized AI bot. And it would give you answers. So I will give you a little demonstration of that. It can't be connected to the one in the office because the connection is a bit weak. So I'm going to show you a video. So this product is available and it's being used. See, what happens is, how many of you guys do e-learning? Right? All of, yep. So what's the big problem with e-learning? Thank you. So you can't ask questions. So what we did was, the first thing we had to do with the e-learning is to be able to have questions being tied with an AI and have you able to ask questions and have the AI answer those questions and in a controlled manner. Does that make sense? Okay. So can you play the second video, please? So this is just a video we did last night. So let's see how it goes. So yeah, so you have a training, just a simple WMS training, and you ask a question. No. Yes. Okay, so how can I assist you? And okay. So the question is below that, says, what is an oxidizer? And off it goes. It tells you what an oxidizer is, right? So this comes from a document that the AI system is trained, okay? So next question. So now what we have done is it also tells you where it's from. Now what we've done is we also fed the SDS documents into the AI, right? How many of you people have large SDS binders? Pause. Right? So if there's an injury, are you going to be running around with this large SDS binder and tell you, okay, now how are you going to help this guy? Have you been in that situation? God forbid, no. Right? So this is a situation where this is where what we've done is we have taken all the WMIS information and all your SDS binders and put them into the AI. And in the AI, you say, okay, this is what I'm using, this is what I need to have. This is the kind of PPE I need to have. Simple question. All you do is you ask your question, what should I use? And it'll give you the answer. Go ahead, play. So so that was what happened with the SDS. The next question is, now what we did was we put the Occupational Health and Safety Act into the AI. And we had that simple question, when do you need to have a health and safety committee? Remember, all of you guys are experts, but if I shift you to the different provinces, would you know what you're doing? Right? Are you going to go through the books? Do you know what sections they are? I found out that even the lawyers have a hard time and it's going to different jurisdictions, right? So what we did was we got the AI to go through the regulation and give you the details, right? Can you go back a bit, please? Okay. No, sorry, go to the middle. This is what happens when you try to do a presentation at 4 in the morning. All right. Okay. So, go forward a bit. So, when do I need a joint health and safety committee, right? And it goes in, and it gives you all the details according to the section. It just literally slices and puts that part in for you. Okay. Now, this takes a little bit of expertise from the AI side. You just can't go into ChatGPT, because what happens with ChatGPT, anyone? What's the word? Yep. What does hallucination means?
Something like a lawyer's nightmare.
So, pause. Okay, so now we had this thing going, and then my first reaction was, what if somebody comes in and asks crazy questions and then come to you and say, well, your AI said this, so therefore I did that. Right? So a silly question we have is, how do I make jelly donuts? Right? You ask ChatGPT that, it'll give you a recipe. You ask our AI, it'll say, no, my expertise lies in this. Right? So it is important to control what is in your AI. Right? How many of you were in the session this morning? Right. So where we went through this whole process. Right? Again, what we are saying is the AI can enhance things. Right? So when Mike comes up with a new a review of something or gotcha kind of information, that would go into this AI. Right? It gets updated. Right? That's what the technology will do for you. Does that make sense? Okay? All right, let's go to the next. Go ahead.
Just key on his words for a moment, enhance. Right? Didn't say replace, enhance. So, everybody's worried about AI is going to replace this room somehow. The experiments I'm hearing so far in terms of trying to implement this, for the most part, it'll change, right? It's going to get updated. There's new evolutions coming, but the people that are using these tools, the AI tools, well right now, it's enhancing the person's exercise of judgment. It's getting me more readily available in a more efficient manner data to help me make a decision. So I think the AI guardrails, little easy guardrails. If I'm going to dump material into it and I'm in my workplace, I'm going to think about whether there is personal information in it or not. So there's a little bit of balance in the guardrail piece. I'm also going to worry, and it is a lawyer's nightmare, right? We hear all about these hallucinations. I think that's probably somebody hedging the AI company's share price, as far as I can tell, because it's going to get to a point where it's going to be solid, and if you don't use it, you're going to get run over, by your competition, generally speaking. So the enhancement, I think, is a piece for us to all think a little bit about in terms of how it's going to help us. If we touch now some of this quick pieces, how many people have spent some time looking at the new changes around personal protective equipment? Right? For the most part, most employers are actually doing this. I can't imagine having a 19-year-old female, 6 foot at a certain weight, go into a Mark's Work warehouse and not be able to get proper safety shoes, size-fitting safety shoes, so that they can walk safely on a construction site. You know that, and I'm not sure we left it in this program, but the idea that we actually have to legislate washrooms on construction sites. We're probably beyond that now, right? So somebody said no, right? Not beyond it, or I didn't hear you right? Okay, sorry, I apologize. So some of the legislation really is conforming to conduct, but what we're trying to get to is the idea that tools to get us there. Quick story, really quick story, true story, large law firm downtown Toronto gets an AI license and licenses every person in their office. Every professionally trained lawyer gets the license, and we're going to try to get into AI, as they said. This is a managing partner telling me the story. We have an AI committee. We have policies for its use. One simple policy is if you use it to produce a piece of work, you make sure that you've identified AI's use in the material you've produced. Some poor commercial litigator on a Sunday is prepping his case for Monday's court hearing and finds cases that don't exist, hallucinations, in his material as he gets ready. Thank God he proofread his materials on a Sunday at least. He goes after the young lawyer, frankly, doesn't harass the young lawyer, but is quite direct with respect to the criticism for failure to have disclosed that. Leads the firm to say, let's audit how this is going. We're 4 months in. First big mistake we found, let's audit so that we find things in an audit, just like we should be doing in health and safety. They audit it. What do they say? Our star lawyers in our firm are using the tool to enhance their work. Our middling lawyers, yes, lawyers admit that there are some middling lawyers in firms. Our middling lawyers are using AI to contract out their work. That's where the mistake is. AI isn't so you can contract out your work, it's to enhance your work, which means as we use these tools, we also want to validate them, right? We're going to have to do a fair bit of validation for the next couple of years for sure. And by the way, I'm not poo-pooing AI. I'm not saying don't use it. Let's validate it. Let's make sure it's an enhancer, right? Not contracting out the work. So the personal protective equipment, I think, is relatively straightforward. If we go to the next slide just briefly, right, similar things, right? We're overlaying the same thing we always do. Risk assessment, and then is there a control? Is there a PPE that will help modify the risk that our worker is facing? We need to make sure, for example, we've trained them. It actually says that in the reg, right? Make sure you've trained them on wearing and how to use. My analogy, really easy, right? If somebody hands me you imagine handing an untrained lawyer fall arrest equipment and saying, put it on and get on the roof, right? I'd be more dangerous than anybody on the ground probably by that point. So I think a lot of this is quite logical. What we're trying to get to is take logic, keep using your expertise in the context you're working in, and then record it all and source some of it through the 4S systems as an example, right? Great systems, because remember, this all, while I want everybody to go home safe, what I'm really trained on is there's been an accident. By the way, if there's an accident, I want to be on that site before the ministry gets there. If I can get on site before the ministry gets there, I'm not changing stuff. We all know that, right? I'm not going to disturb a scene, but I am going to remind workers when they were trained last. I've read too many Crown disclosures that say Sabesh gets interviewed and they say, so what kind of training have you got on health and safety? And his first nervous answer to the ministry inspector is, we haven't been trained here, which we know is a crock. So can I get to him early so that the Ministry of Labor inspector, when they start to do their interviewing and investigating, not inspecting, investigating, because we've got an injury, and I think they're now into investigating. Big difference, right, for a lot of us, inspecting versus investigating. I want him already, and if I can, especially if I'm using a system, I can pop up a laptop in front of him and say, here's where you did the training. 3 months ago on a Monday, you were in the classroom and we went through the following. I'm not doing anything wrong whatsoever, right? I'm not trying to cheat the system. I'm trying to improve my defense based upon what I did and the work I put in to make sure that it was stored properly so that I could access it again. Right? Seems common sense, but it's it takes a bit of work. So we need these systems to help us with the work, to make this more efficient.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. What I wanted to go to is talk a little bit about this from an overall perspective. And thank you, Mike, for bringing the details from the legal side, or from the side where when things go bad, this is what you need to do, or this is what you should have had, or this is what you should have. Okay, so we've been doing this for years, and it's just not. I call it. We're not just looking at the forest from the trees. We're actually looking at the forest from the leaves. So let's get a picture up first, okay? And what I'm trying to explain to you is a very simple concept, but it. A picture would make a lot more sense. So this is what we call a full-blown process flow diagram and a full-blown risk analysis. Okay. So what we do is we say your product comes there, and your materials, raw materials come there, and your final product goes here. This is seriously engineering stuff that we like, right? And so what we're going to do is, we're going to look at each of these little tasks that people have to do to make things happen. So we're going to just blow up that whole thing on just the liquid bulk training, right? And do the analysis, okay? So in the analysis, the outcome is going to be training and procedures, PPE inspection, your preventative maintenance plan, your specific emergency response. This is Mickey Mousey stuff that all you guys do. But here comes the interesting stuff. So we do the analysis just like this. This is on the system. We put all this information together. We even have what kind of PPE you need, your legislative references, your procedures, all kinds of good stuff, which all of you guys do for a living. But here comes the important part. So now this guy, let's call him Joe. Joe, guy like you shows up. Okay? You come in, and you are a liquid tanker truck driver. So we give you all the training, we give you all the PPE, right? We grab all those records. Now here comes the interesting part. In our system, it's not just a safety system. We also monitor your time and what you were doing and what kind of chemicals you were exposed to when you were doing that, right? So now we are not just doing, because we are assigning this task to the hazards to the person, we are now able to, and we are monitoring their time, and we are monitoring the kind of inspection work they do. We can also figure out what exposures they have, and we can figure out what kind of problems the person's having, and have that all centered and sent to a centralized dashboard. Does that make sense to anyone? Yes? So it's not just qualifications. Now the other interesting thing is legislative references. Once the legislative references changes, it gets flagged on that particular JSA, right? Once it gets flagged in there, you have to go back and look at everything to make sure it complies with that legislation. Once it complies with that legislation, guess what? You make changes, all those changes flow right to the person who is affected by that legislation, whose job is affected by that legislation.
The Power Act, just so you know, this is in the offing. Sometimes we worry about the balance between the employer's need to know. So think of the identity he was talking about, chemical exposure and so forth. The employers need to know, and the least intrusive means to achieve that. That's the balance. And over the course of the next 12 months, you're going to hear our federal government talk a whole bunch about privacy, right? They're going to review something called PIPEDA, and they're going to review something called the Privacy Act, and they're going to divorce out of it AI compliance, because they're going to actually look at AI separately, thank God. That all comes from something called C27. So if you wanted to read back about it, before the last federal government prorogue, so back in young Prime Minister Trudeau's days, They prorogued the House before C-27 got through, but we're going to see a lot of rewriting of privacy. This starts to move toward addressing those privacy things, because in the privacy world, it's what's the employer's legitimate need to know, and I know I'm being repetitive, what's the employer's legitimate need to know, what's the least intrusive means to get there, and you'll see things now from the CPO where it looks like he's getting the authority right away to be able to deal with personal information. Personal information is sort of a catchphrase that gets all the privacy experts' eyes open to say, you know, am I being compliant when I have personal information? We don't need to go through that today, but just keep your head up, keep in tune to what changes are coming, and our Chief Prevention Officer is going to start to wade into that. That's the Power Act. Remember, the Power Act is much broader than just health and safety, but there is specific sections to change his authority, to increase his authority. How many people have any exposure to the mining industry historically? So we got a couple. You remember, if you go back, mining used to be probably the most dangerous place to work. Some people will say still is, but statistically, the Chief Prevention Officer ahead of Dr. Moody, who's currently in place, you go back to Ron Kaluski or maybe George Gritsiotis, both of them are responsible for changing our experience in mining. And some of that change was specific studies into mining. What's so unique about mining? Why are so many people getting hurt in mining? How do we change it? And the Chief Prevention Officer is actually a vehicle through which, an expertise through which, that office can retain research. My last parting comment on this is, and we're going to go through some of these. The last thing to remember too is workplace safety and insurance. You've heard in past years, you've heard from Jeff Lang and his colleagues, just birthed, and I put it that way on purpose, something called WorkSafe Ontario Fund. Take a look at WorkSafe Ontario Fund, because it is focused on how do we fund research to reduce workplace disease and illness. If Jeff was here, he'd be saying to the two of us, his job as the CEO or the president of Workplace Safety and Insurance Board is to put himself out of work, right? Can we actually put ourselves out of work? But that WorkSafe Ontario Fund feels a lot like the CPO's new authority to start to get into more research to try to help us on the bigger issues that are contributing to a maintenance of critical injuries and fatalities, unfortunately. Questions? Maybe we go there just in the interest of time. We've got like 4 or 5 minutes. We always promise to try to not run over, but is there anything that was burning that you were hoping we would comment on, or you want to ask questions or make comments yourself? Anybody at all? Sir?
Just to stimulate conversation, when you talk about the AI enhancing training, so let's say I'm a brand new worker and I come in and I deal with chemicals, I have to take WIMS training, right? I would still take the formalized WIMS training, but the AI could enhance my refresher if it wants up, you're saying, yes or no? Absolutely, yeah. You know, as we sit here today as professionals, 90% of the supervisors in this province have never opened the Green Book. Are you going to help them do that?
I love the question. Thank you. Or the comment, right? Everybody knows what the Green Book is, hopefully, or you shouldn't be in the room. And if you don't know what the Green Book is, come see me afterwards, and I'll give you a free copy. Right? Start there. But think of the analogy for a moment to training. Training and comprehending depends on how good a trainer I've got sometimes. It also depends on, can I augment it with videos? Can I change the language? Can I actually show somebody as opposed to just talk to them in a classroom? Like, I think of skilled trades for a moment, right? I'm the chair of Skilled Trades Ontario. Spent a lot of time on how do we train people who are tactile, who want to use their hands. I usually can't train them for 4 hours. The only person that wants to train 4 hours in a boardroom these days is a lawyer, right? Like, nobody wants to be there for 4 hours. But can I do an hour, and then to your point, can I take the Green Book and pull some pages out of it so that they don't get buried in the 600, 700, 800 pages? And can I take to them those 2 pages? And sometimes, remember, we unfortunately write in legalese. Can I make it plainer? Right? Respectful, but plainer, so that I can ensure comprehension. And look, I don't want to make light of his comment. I think he's right. Not enough of our people are exposed to all the materials that are available. But I think it behooves us these days, with all these tools we have, to make the access to that information easier. And look, how many of you have a memory of the best boss you ever worked for? Hands up, right? Every one of us can remember a best boss. How about a best teacher, right? Are you emulating the skills that got you to say they were the best teacher? That's where I go sometimes to say, like, I'm not the best teacher, but can I get better because I was lucky and I had a couple of great teachers? Can I emulate their skills to try to increase comprehension? Quick story to finish. I'm, 22. I'm working in a foundry. They're melting zinc metal to zinc oxide. Think of the oven that the ingot gets dropped into to start the melt process. The walls are usually, 6 to 8 inches wide if you're lucky. Every one of them has a cap that goes on top of those things. You put the cap on, you use your axe, your pick to take the slag off the wall. I walk in one day as a 22-year-old, 1 month into the summer, and the guy I'm replacing, who's about 50 years old, is straddling the foundry pot without the thing on it, without the cap, and he's swinging a pickaxe. And you know what happens if he falls. So that's the kind of person I got to get to and change the thinking. I invite you to remember that story when your 18, 19, 20-year-olds want to please the boss walk into your workplace on Monday next week. Talk to them about the kinds of things you want them to speak up about so that you can have a good educational conversation and ensure they or their colleague gets home the same way they showed up. So thank you very much for spending time with us. I hope the day was